Hi, everybody. My name is Joel Spivak. Welcome to our SIA meeting via Zoom this year. I am the acting president until we get things back together. Always interested in meeting people that have some great creative thing going on in Philadelphia. And I had a wonderful walk around with Joe a couple of weeks ago, and it's a great park to visit. And of course, Joe is going to tell you all about it, and he'll show you things that he showed me. So welcome, Joe Walsh, and you can introduce yourself.
All right, good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming to this Zoom, and thanks for your interest in Baldwin Park. I'm one of the friends of Baldwin Park. The Friends group has been around since 2007, and we're getting more active every year. So what I was going to do, I have about 90 slides. I think this talk will take about an hour. So if you have questions, put them in the chat, and then we can open up the mics at the end as well. If you have a question about a particular slide, just try to remember which slide it is or put it in the chat, and we can come back to that slide at the end. So let's get going. So I thought I'd talk about Matthias Baldwin Park and its location in Philadelphia, what we do there, and then the 6 phases of our neighborhood. The pre-human phase, the Lenape, before the Europeans came, the colonial period when William Penn came after the Dutch and the Swedes came, and then the industrial age, which is of most interest. And the biggest industrialist in our neighborhood was Matthias Baldwin. And I'll try to show you some of the artifacts. There aren't many, but there are some things that are remaining from that industrial period. And then like a lot of industrial areas of Philadelphia, there was some disinvestment and industry left, people left, and some areas got redeveloped. And I'll talk about the Franklin Town redevelopment and then how the neighborhood looks today. Joel, can you mute yourself? I think you're showing up as the active speaker. So I'm not sure where everyone's from, but this is the United States. Philadelphia is over here on the East Coast. This is a satellite view of Philadelphia. I think most people here are from Philadelphia, but just in case you're not, this is the Delaware River running down the east side. The Schuylkill River runs up the west side, and William Penn located his city in the narrowest part, the 2 square mile area here. And in 1854.
Joe, we're not seeing your slides.
I'm sorry?
We're not seeing your slides.
Oh, really?
No.
Oh, it says I'm screen sharing.
No,
I'm seeing your slide just fine, thank you.
yes,
Yeah, I'm seeing slides.
yeah. I'm sorry, who is that? Who's not seeing them?
Jim Fennell.
Yeah,
Do you have them yet, Jim?
no, I just have you blown up to full size.
Oh, put me in a small little box. I think
Okay.
the slides are behind me.
So I would keep going.
All right. So that's Philadelphia. And here's a lower satellite image of our neighborhood. So this is City Hall down here. You have the Ben Franklin Parkway run up to the Art Museum. This is Logan Circle or Logan Square. You have the Free Library here, and just north of the Free Library, I'm sorry, north of the Municipal Court building right here is Matthias Baldwin Park right here. Spring Garden Street runs to our north. Callow Hill Street is right along here, and this is the Vine Street Expressway. So this is Matthias Baldwin Park as it was seen in 1991. At that time, it was called Franklin Town Park. There was a development project that was going to redevelop 50 acres in this neighborhood in 1971. And because they were using redevelopment authority money, they had to pledge to devote 1% of the development costs to public art. So they devoted their 1% to this park. So the whole park is a 1% for art project at a cost of $1 million in 1991. So you can see in 1991, this is 19th Street over here. There's a surface parking lot here, surface parking lot here to the north, and there's a surface parking lot to the east. Down here, we'll talk about later, you can see the Callow Hill Cut. In 1991, these tracks were active. They were deactivated in 1992. So the artist for this 1% for Art project was Athena Taka, seen here in 2013. She's a landscape artist, and she is still alive and still in contact with the Friends group. And this is the park as seen today. So this is looking from Jim Fennell. Jim Fennell is our president of the Friends group. He has an apartment or a condo on the 9th floor, and this is looking downwards from the west at Matthias Baldwin Park. It is a beautiful, lush park. It was designed with 50 trees chosen by Athena Taka. The central raised landscape beds are in the shape of crescents with these 9 plinths, which she calls nodes of energy spread throughout the landscape beds. But there's a lot of different trees. There is color in all seasons. What do we do in the park? The Friends group keeps it clean and supports it, keeps an eye on the park so we can alert the city to what's going on. But also there are events. In 2017, 18, and 19, we sponsored Parks on Tap, which is always a big event for 5 days each year. We have our annual Halloween dog parade, the weekend of Halloween. This year we had over 100 dogs and over 300 people. We have movie night on the last Thursday before school starts every summer, at least for 2 summers so far. And that's it's a very nice venue for having outdoor theater. We have a neighborhood scavenger hunt. And this is in the second weekend in May. So we provide clues, teams go out and find these clues, and they're all within 2 blocks of Matthias Baldwin Park. We also try to do some nature education. And this is Stan Ordo. He, in 2007, he proposed using the park as an educational environment to tag all the trees with their scientific name, their common name. And we put on a QR code so that when you click on that QR code, it takes you to a page on our website that talks about that specific species of trees with pictures of the trees in the park. So this project was proposed in 2007. It took until 2020 to get it completely done. And we are thankful for a grant to complete that project. That was from Fairmount Park Conservancy. And then we also have a website that we have, of course, a join button, but also under the history section, there's 52 articles about sites within 2 blocks of the park. So it's hyperlocal history. It's mainly appealing to the neighborhood to build a sense of community, that there's a history in this neighborhood. And even though you might only be a renter now, there has been a lot of happenings in this neighborhood. You can go on and find all the trees in the park, all the plants in the park. And of course, we show the upcoming events like tonight's talk. Oh, and everything I'm going to say after this point is on our website. And if you go to the search search box up here, you just type in anything that I mention or anything that you might think should be mentioned, put in that box, and most likely there's an article about it. There's 52 published articles, and there's 17 more that are in the works but are not yet published. So let's talk about the neighborhood. So the history depends on how far back you want to go, but let's go back 15,000 years ago. We're in the middle of an ice age right now. The last glacial episode during the current ice age was about 15,000 years ago. When the glacier starts coming down from the poles, it ties up enough water that the ocean levels drop, and there's a land bridge formed between Asia and North America. Over that land bridge, we think Asiatic peoples came and they gradually, over the last 15,000 years, moved their way towards Pennsylvania. As those groups moved towards the east, they splintered, became isolated, developed their own cultures, their own languages. And the group that was in the Philadelphia area when the Europeans arrived was called the Lenape. They were actually the Southern Unami dialect. Their totem animal was the turtle. And here you can see the Delaware River going between New Jersey and Pennsylvania, and the Schuylkill River goes up this way. And the Wissahickon is not shown, but it would be going up this way. So I mentioned those rivers because there's still evidence of the Indians, American Indians in our neighborhood. This is Logan Square, the Swan Fountain, or the Fountain of the Three Rivers, as it's formally called. But in that fountain, you have the turtle, which recalls the totem animal of the Lenape tribe that was here. There's also three frogs. There was a sub-tribe on Burlington Island in the Delaware that their totem was the frog. Also, you see the three American Indian statues, one representing the Delaware, one the Schuylkill, and one the Wissahickon River. This fountain was designed by Alexander Calder. Up here you see City Hall with William Penn. We'll mention him in a second. And another American Indian is up here. This is the Angel Moroni on top of the Temple of the Mormons. According to Mormon beliefs, he was the last of the Indian tribe called the Nephites. His father was Mormon, wrote a book, gave it to Moroni. Moroni buried it, and then resurrected later on to show it to Joseph Smith. So a couple American Indian references in our neighborhood right now. This is a Benjamin West painting from the 1770s, trying to do image the first meeting between William Penn and the Lenape Sachem Tamanend, occurring at what is now Penn Treaty Park. So Penn, according to everything I read, got along well with the Native Americans. He also had Thomas Holm draw up a map of the city to start selling plots. He got the land from King Charles II. He got the whole state of Pennsylvania and Delaware in 1681, and then immediately drew this up to start sales of real estate before he even arrived in 1682. But you can see the 2 square miles of Philadelphia. Here's Vine Street here. Down here is what was called Cedar Street, now called South Street. The Delaware River runs along the east. Schuylkill River runs along the west. So most Philadelphians have seen this numerous times. Our neighborhood is close to what is now Logan Square. This was called Northwest Square back in the old days. So this is a contemporaneous map of Philadelphia back in the late 1600s. Shows the city of Philadelphia. Now, Penn thought that the city would develop at both river sides, so along the Delaware and along the Schuylkill. As it happened, most of the development occurred along the Delaware. You can also see here that despite what William Penn called the virgin settlement of Philadelphia, there were other people here besides the American Indians. There were natives, there were Swedes and Dutch and other English people. There were 2 colonies before William Penn, New Sweden and New Netherlands, that were here. So he just asked all the people that were here to pledge allegiance to him as the proprietor of Pennsylvania, and things went swimmingly after that. William Penn kept for himself this area north of Philadelphia. It would later become what was called Springettsbury Manor, and we'll talk about that. So here's a map from 1777 showing the city of Philadelphia here. All of this was Penn's own lands. It was variously called Springettsbury Manor or Penn Township, but in the early 1700s, Springettsbury Manor was built, at what is now City View Apartments or condos on 20th and Hamilton Street. In 1718, to settle the estate of William Penn, his family paid Alexander Hamilton, the lawyer who did that, by giving him some land. The land was between 19th and 12th Street, going from Vine up to Fairmont. So it was a big chunk of land that went to Alexander Hamilton, and he built Bush Hill estate on top of that land. So there are two estates pretty close together, but otherwise it was mostly barren up in this area. Penn owned from, like I said, from 12th Street up until up to Lemon Hill, what is now Lemon Hill. So I just want to point out this other river here, the Hokonoke River. The Europeans call that Peg's Run, and that's what I'll call it as well. So remember that for later. So this is a 1797 map. It shows our neighborhood up in here. You can see the hill that Springettsbury Manor is atop, and the other hill on which Bush Hill lies. You can see Peg's Run right in this little valley here, the shaded valley going from the Delaware up towards about 15th Street. And then Robert Morris in 1788, Robert Morris was considered the financier of the Revolution. He was one of only two people to sign all three historic documents, the Articles of Confederation, the Declaration of Independence, and the Constitution. But he bought Penn's property in 1788 from 12th Street, I'm sorry, from 19th Street up until Lemon Hill. And he had an idea to build a canal connecting the developed Delaware area to the Schuylkill River, and then having a system of canals and cartways all the way to Pittsburgh. So his canal was proposed along this route right here, just south of Springettsbury Manor, just south of Bush Hill, kind of parallel to what is now Callow Hill Street. This is Callow Hill Street here. So Springettsbury Manor was named after Penn's first wife, whose maiden name was Springett, and Callow Hill Street was named after Penn's second wife, Hannah Callow Hill Penn. So this was dug to be about 5 feet deep all the way out to about here. But then Morris, who was a land speculator, ran into trouble and actually went bankrupt and spent 3 years in debtor's prison. And this plan of his was abandoned for the time being. And this is a closer view of that. So you can see the proposed canal running down here and heading out towards Peg's Run to link up with that. So in the 1820s, there was a big push from all the ports on the East Coast, New York, Philadelphia, Baltimore, to tap into the areas west of the Allegheny Mountains. New York got to it first. They built the Erie Canal, finished it in 1825, which connected Lake Erie with the Hudson and then down to New York. Baltimore built a railroad between Baltimore and Pittsburgh in 1830. So Philadelphia was authorized to build the main line of public works in 1826. And what that was, it was a 4 sections of railroad and canals connecting Philadelphia to Pittsburgh. The first section went from Broad and Vine in Philadelphia out to the town of Columbia on the Susquehanna. Then there'd be canals going up the Susquehanna along the Juniata. And then you'd have this mountain here, mountain range here, the Alleghenies. So you would have 5 portages up inclines here, and then 5 down on this side, and then you get back into the river and canal system all the way to Pittsburgh. So this section here was pretty easy to build. The only obstacle was getting over the Schuylkill River and up the Belmont incline. So this is the first Columbia Bridge. So the Columbia Bridge is still there in its 3rd incarnation, but this was built in 1834. Once the trains got over the Columbia Bridge, they could not get up this half-mile long incline up to the Belmont Plateau. locomotives did not have enough power or traction to go up a 7% grade. So they would disconnect the locomotive, hook it up to this rope here, and that would be wrapped around a pulley at the top of the Bement incline, and a steam-powered engine would propel that pulley around and pull those train cars up the incline. So this is the same system, the incline planes that were used on the Allegheny Portage Railroad as well. There were 5, as you went west, there were 5 inclines going up, 5 separate inclines, and then 5 going down. And you can go out and see the museums out in Hollidaysburg and Johnstown today. So I'm going to talk about the machine makers and coming to the neighborhood. So I'll use this map as a reference. This is a map from 1862. It shows Pennsylvania Avenue, on which the rail line was established. It went down Broad Street to Broad and Vine. This is Callow Hill Street right here. Spring Garden Street is the wide street at top. And this is 19th Street right here. And I'll put the future Baldwin Park in the shaded to show you as a reference point for all these maps. So this is 19th Street, 18th Street, Hamilton Street, and the Pennsylvania Avenue. So the first connection of our neighborhood to industrialists is with your own Oliver Evans. Oliver Evans was a kind of the Leonardo da Vinci of early 1800s in Philadelphia. He took the mantle from Ben Franklin, I would say. But he was born in 1755 in Delaware. He moved to Philadelphia, and he was famous for developing high-pressure steam engines. So steam engines had been around for a while. He developed a boiler that could withstand higher pressures, and it didn't make the steam engines more powerful necessarily, but it made them able to develop the same power in a much smaller volume. So it's kind of like the miniaturization of steam engines was allowed by Oliver Evans. Someone mentioned before we started about the Oructor amphibolus. This is, some people call it the first automobile in America, but Oliver Evans developed this in 1804. He put a 5-horsepower steam engine on this massive structure. This weighed 15 tons. And he set up so that it would propel itself on land with rotary motion on the wheels, and it could propel itself in the water with these paddle wheels in the back. So apparently this did function. He drove it down Market Street into the Schuylkill and down to the Delaware, but it was not commercially viable. The other thing you will notice about Oliver Evans, if you go up Kelly Drive, excuse me, right near Lloyd Hall, is this historical marker about the Fairmont Waterworks. And the waterworks, when it moved to Fairmont, was powered by high pressure steam engines that were made by Oliver Evans, and you see that in the mention down here. So apparently, as best I can tell, he was kind of a great inventor, but kind of a prickly personality. So he didn't make many friends, and he doesn't get the recognition that he probably deserves. So you can put things in the chat that counteract what I said there, but we'll leave it at that. So when in 1619, Oliver Evans had his Mars Iron Foundry at 9th and Vine. It burned down, and 4 days later, Oliver Evans found out, and then he died 4 days after he found out, while he was living in New York at the time. But his sons-in-law, James Rush and Peter Muhlenberg, were also in the business with him, and they decided to rebuild in more open territory up at 16th and Spring Garden Street. So this is the Rush and Muhlenberg initially. It later became Matthew and Moore Iron Foundry. And then the next person to move in was William Norris, who took advantage of the railroad here to start a locomotive works right next to Rush and Muhlenberg. In fact, he presumably with consent, he poked a hole in Rush and Muhlenberg's factory to tap into their power shafting to provide power to his business. So, what allowed people to move into this neighborhood was the fact that once you develop steam power, you didn't need running water to power your machines, whether they were mills or machine shops or whatever. Steam power allowed movement away from the rivers. Also, once you had the railroads, you didn't need the rivers for transport. You didn't need canal systems. There was much more open land in this area. It was pretty much undeveloped in 1819. And there was a plentiful supply of labor in the city. As these industries sprung up, row homes developed between all the buildings, and there were many immigrants coming to Philadelphia that supplied the labor. This is a sketch from 1855. We're looking up north on 17th Street. Spring Garden Street is at the top. This is Hamilton Street going east-west. And this is the Richard Norris and Sons Locomotive Works. They had taken over the business from William, and it had grown to become the biggest locomotive factory in the world. They employed 1,000 people, and this is around their peak year in 1855. This is the way that street looks today. This is 17th Street looking north towards Spring Garden. Both sides of the street are occupied by the Community College of Philadelphia, also known as CCP. But the Norris brothers were most famous, I suspect, for building the George Washington. This was a locomotive that they built in 1836. And its claim to fame was that it was able to pull itself and freight-loaded cars up the Belmont incline. And that was a feat that was thought impossible at the time, going up a 7% grade with a locomotive in 1836. But this was published. Their name became famous. They started making a lot of locomotives and exporting, in fact, 30% of their output to other countries. The next business to come to our neighborhood was Matthias Baldwin. He located at Broad and Hamilton, and he was here. His business was here from 1831 to 1926. That's a long time. Matthias Baldwin was born in Elizabethtown, New Jersey in 1795. He was the youngest child of a carriage maker. His father died when he was 4. The estate was mishandled and the family ended up somewhat poor. And Matthias Baldwin came to Philadelphia at the age of 16 to serve a 6-year apprenticeship up in Frankford, part of Philadelphia. And he was apprenticed to a jewelry maker, the Woolworth brothers. After his apprenticeship, he got a job as a journeyman with Thomas Fletcher. This is a sketch from 1832 showing Thomas Fletcher's shop next to the Second Bank on Chestnut Street. So the Second Bank is still there. I don't think this, this building is definitely not there. But Fletcher and Gardner and his partner Gardner made high-end silverware. And here's an example. This is in the Philadelphia Museum of Art. There are several pieces from Fletcher and Gardner in the museum, and they are beautiful. Baldwin stayed with Fletcher and Gardner for 2 years. He decided he got tired of making what he called gewgaws and decided to get into bigger endeavors. So he got a shop on Lodge Alley, which is down near what is now Randstead and 7th Street. And in 1828, he built a stationary steam engine to power his factory. And that stationary engine was used in his factory for the next 4 decades. So it was more compact than previous stationary engines. And in fact, if you go to the Smithsonian Institute in the American Museum of, I think it's the American History Museum, on the first floor, there's a corner devoted to his stationary steam engine. This is the original Baldwin stationary steam engine. You can see his picture down here. So it is fairly compact. Based on the fine machining of his stationary steam engine, people asked him to build a locomotive steam engine. And he did that in 1832. He built a locomotive called Old Ironsides. And he used it to pull a train from 9th and Spring Garden up to Germantown. And he worked out the kinks and started making more steam locomotives. This model of the Old Ironsides is in the Franklin Institute today. So Matthias Baldwin built 1,000 locomotives in his lifetime. He died in 1866 at his country estate in Wissinoming. This is it pictured in the late 1800s when it was what's down here, it says old lady's home. Probably not politically correct today. Here's another sign here. But this building is no longer there. It's up near the Tacony Bridge. And on that bike trail there, near the site, there is a historic marker noting the presence of Matthias Baldwin's country home here. Matthias Baldwin is buried with, I think, pretty much all of his family in Laurel Hill on Millionaires Row. So he has a prominent place in Laurel Hill.
There it is.
So the Baldwin business went on after the death of Matthias Baldwin. Here's a sketch from 1872 showing Broad Street running this way. Spring Garden Street recedes into the distance. You have Pennsylvania Avenue with the locomotive running on it here. Back here is the Cathedral of St. Peter and Paul on Logan Circle. But you can see that even by 1872, Baldwin was no longer confined to just this one building that he started, and it was extending westward as far as 16th Street, even by 1872. Eventually, Baldwin Locomotive Works would extend as far as 19th Street in a contiguous fashion, and I'll show you that. But I just want to show you the neighborhood from the workers' perspective. The Baldwin Locomotive Works employed at its peak close to 19,000 people. So a lot of those people lived in the neighborhood in very dense conditions. This is 18th Street looking north. This is North by Northwest Tower. This is Spring Garden Tower. Over on the right, you have Community College of Philadelphia Athletic Center. So this is what it looks like today. But back in 1898, it looked like this. So you have trolley line running up 18th Street. You have Baldwin Locomotive Works going as far as 18th Street in 1898. The Pickering Springs Company made railroad springs. And shortly after this picture was taken, it would be acquired by Baldwin Locomotive Works. So Pickering Springs is in the southern part of what is now Matthias Baldwin Park. So Baldwin would own the southern part of Baldwin Park by 1902. And you can see this building here is just, I think, a beautiful building. It's, industrial chic, but it is a very solid looking building. And all the Baldwin locomotive buildings look like this that he built. So I'll just go back to this. If you come southwards on 18th Street, on the east side of the street, this is what the neighborhood looked like. So you have row homes, some of which had businesses on the first floor, like this coal dealer. This looks like an old stable that was converted into a carpenter shop, but these row homes, most of them were boarding homes for the workers. So in a boarding home, you'd have the mistress of the home. She might not be the owner, but she is paid to run the home. In each one of these homes, you might have 12 men who worked for Baldwin or one of the other industrial factories. And the mistress of the house would do their cooking, do their laundry, and that's how she made a living. This is the other side of the street at the time. Again, you see a bunch of 5 row homes. There's a grocery store here. There's a tobacco store here, and this is some sort of retail down here. So this would be zoned what's called CMX2 now, so which means basically residential with first floor neighborhood type retail. Of course, there's no zoning at this time in 1894 when this picture was taken. So Baldwin tried to expand upwards. All his buildings in our neighborhood on the 19 acres that were in our building were expanded vertically. But eventually he just ran out of room, and he decided, or his business decided, to purchase 600 acres down in Eddystone, which is south of the airport. And all these buildings are for the Baldwin Locomotive Works. He purchased the land in 1906. When I say he, I mean the Baldwin Locomotive Works in 1906. And by 1926, they were completely located in Eddystone with no more functions being performed in our neighborhood. So this building here, you can see from I-95 in the wintertime when there's no leaves on the trees, and it is still there. It's Baldwin Tower, which is an office building today. So I said that Baldwin was completely out of our neighborhood in 1926. So pretty much everything you see here, except for the Mint, was part of Baldwin. Let me just orient you to this picture from 1928, because you'll see it a couple times. This is Spring Garden Street. Running this way is Broad Street with the four-year-old nice white Elverson building, which would become the Inquirer building. What else? This is Callow Hill Street here. You have this building here. This building was built by Baldwin in 1916 as a munitions plant to supply the Allies in World War I. After World War I, it was converted into a locomotive factory. So everything that's pretty much dark was part of Baldwin. And they were all fallow in 1928. Everything over here was eventually torn down in 1936. Most of these other structures became warehouses, and this particular building and a few others near here were used by ITE circuit breaker manufacturers. This building here with the Baldwin water towers on top is in the north part of what is now Baldwin Park. So let's look around the neighborhood for some artifacts of the industrial age. So one artifact I'd like to talk about is from this corner of Spring Garden Street and Broad Street. This is the northeast corner of Spring Garden and Broad. You see the Lulu Temple that's owned by the Shriners. You can see the Spring Garden Institute, which was a practical technology school. And down the lower right, you see a statue. And here's a better shot of that statue. So this is a statue of Matthias Baldwin. In 1906, Baldwin Locomotive Works paid to have this statue made and put at the corner of Broad and Spring Garden, right across from the company headquarters. It was eventually moved to City Hall in the 1920s. And then by 1936, it was placed on the north apron of City Hall, and it is still there today. Now, this statue became somewhat famous last year when, during the protests over the George Floyd murder, some people vandalized it by spray painting the words murderer, colonizer, and the acronym ACAB on it. I guess ACAB, I'm told, means all cops are bastards. But this became a cause célèbre among the conservatives in the United States, because Matthias Baldwin, his statue was vandalized, and he was in fact an abolitionist. He was an abolitionist his whole life. He paid for rent for a school for Black children. He paid the teachers. He went to the state legislature in 1837 during the state convention to make the Constitution of Pennsylvania preserve the franchise for Black males. He was unsuccessful at doing that, but he did make that fight. He devoted a lot of money to the Union cause. He built churches, especially in poor neighborhoods. And as he hired Blacks in his shop at a time when that was not popular. Now that all that work cost him business among the southern states, but he was willing to make that sacrifice to stand up for what he believed in. So he was an all-around good guy. So a lot of conservatives, news outlets approached the Friends group to make statements. So Jim Fennell had a quote in the Inquirer, and our website just in 3 days got 8,000 hits because Sandy Owens had written an article about Matthias Baldwin, and apparently that was a very popular item to find out the story about Matthias Baldwin. Another artifact is at the northwest corner of the park on 19th Street. This is a state historical marker commemorating Baldwin Locomotive Works, and you can read it there. I read that he employed up to 18,000 workers at its peak. And he did occupy a huge area. Some of you have, I'm sure, have seen this artifact in the Franklin Institute. This is Baldwin Locomotive Works' 60,000th locomotive. They built it as an experiment. It was huge, it was heavy, it was technically complex, and it was a commercial failure. But it was built in 1926, and the Baldwin Locomotive Works sold it to the Franklin Institute in 1934 for $1, and they helped build tracks down Vine Street so they can pull it into the Franklin Institute before they closed up the west wall of the Institute. And this has been there for the last 87 years. It used to move, but it no longer moves, but it is an incredible machine to see. This is a mural at 417 North 20th Street. This mural was painted 2 years ago by Philip Adams as part of the mural arts program. And this mural recalls a lot of the history that I've talked about so far. There's a turtle down here that recalls the Lenape. The flowers recall the extensive gardens that were at Springettsbury Manor. Here's the Baldwin 60,000 that's now in this Franklin Institute. In the background, you see the Baldwin shops. This electric hoist was built by another neighborhood machine maker, William Sellers. So there's a lot in here. If you go to the website, there's a whole article about the interpretation of this piece of art as it relates to the neighborhood. And the most prominent artifact in our neighborhood is the Callow Hill Cut, which when people come to the neighborhood, they don't understand the purpose of this ditch, they call it. But this is a view from 1884 of Broad Street here, Spring Garden Street running off this way. Again, you can see Baldwin Locomotive Works. You can see the engine running down Pennsylvania Avenue. In the background, you can see the cathedral, and another landmark for the neighborhood is the Granary building. So the train tracks down Pennsylvania Avenue ran right past the Granary, right past William Sellers, right past Baldwin Locomotive Works. Asa Whitney had a car wheel works. He made wheels for locomotives. So a lot of the people who were here, a lot of the industrialists were here because of the train tracks. This view is from 1894, and it shows one of the complications from having train tracks running through your city. This is Broad Street, over here is Callow Hill Street, and this is Pennsylvania Avenue right here. So you have 14 tracks crossing Broad Street, which created a bit of a rush hour in 1894. Not only did it create congestion, but it also created accidents. There were about 300 deaths per year from interactions between trains and pedestrians. And the city wanted to do something about it, so they joined with the Reading Railroad, who owned this line at the time, and they mutually agreed to get the railroad tracks off grade. So in some parts, they put it below grade, in some parts, they put it above grade. So this is another shot of Pennsylvania Avenue in 1894, looking towards the east, down Pennsylvania Avenue from 20th Street. You have the Granary right here, right next to the tracks. You have Stanley Flagg, who made iron pipe fittings here. And I'll talk about him in a little bit. But this is how congested the city was and how close these buildings, this is a residence here, but how close these buildings are to the train tracks. So in our neighborhood, the tracks were put below grade, 25 feet below grade. They dug a ditch, put 4 tracks running from 22nd Street all the way to Broad Street. And at Broad Street, the tracks came up slowly and then went on an elevated track, which curves around here to go to the Reading Terminal. And then there was another line on elevated tracks going up towards Fairmount Avenue. So this is called the Callow Hill Cut because this is Callow Hill Street right here. And when this goes west towards 22nd Street, it goes through a tunnel from 22nd Street to 29th Street. And this whole train track system is the goal is to make it part of the rail park. The rail park is a linear park that is finished from Broad Street to 12th Street. The first quarter mile is done, and that's the first segment, but they want to make the next segment an elevated line, an elevated park, like the High Line in New York, going up to Fairmount Avenue. And the goal is to make this Callow Hill Cut also part of the rail park, and then maybe do something with the tunnel that runs along Pennsylvania Avenue. So we'll see what happens with that. They're trying to raise money for that project. I'll show you a few more artifacts. William Sellers, I mentioned his name before. He built an electric hoist in the picture, but his business is right here between 16th and 17th Street on Pennsylvania Avenue. William Sellers basically built huge machines and supplied them to other huge machine makers. So he supplied Baldwin and other machine makers. This is hydraulic riveting machines. So you can see the guy down here. So these machines were huge. Sellers also was big in making shafting. So this is a machine shop. You can see William Sellers on the nameplate down here. But you have many machines being run off leather straps that connected to pulleys up here. Those pulleys connected to axles, which trace back to a stationary steam engine somewhere in this building. So you would have miles of leather straps and maybe miles of axles and pulleys supplied by one engine. Once electricity came into vogue, all this disappeared because you'd have electric motor at each individual machine. So this here is a lathe. The rotary motion supplied by the steam engine was translated into rotary motion on this wheel, which turned whatever was in that lathe. This is the William Sellers shop. This is 17th Street right here. We're heading south down towards Pennsylvania Avenue. You can see the locomotive on Pennsylvania Avenue. Now it's interesting that these buildings here were originally part of the Norris Locomotive Works, and they did survive in this neighborhood until the 1970s. So this is kind of an artifact that didn't quite make it the whole time. But if you look at this picture we saw before, this is the William Sellers machine shops here, right behind the Third Mint. But there's all these bridges that run north-south, and then there's this bridge that runs kind of at a diagonal. So trains would come down the train tracks, go up a ramp right here, and go over this bridge into the William Sellers workyard. And that bridge is still here. So that's this bridge here, as seen in the Callow Hill Cut between 16th and 17th Street. Both ends of this bridge are blocked off because on this side you have a parking garage that holds 1,000 cars. And on this side, you have a surface parking lot. So there's no access to this bridge. The surface is kind of worn, but the steel structures are in pretty good shape. Another artifact that's peculiar in our neighborhood arises from the Stanley Flag Company. I mentioned before that he made iron pipe fittings, and he was here from 1865 to 1897. Just west of Baldwin Park on 19th Street, at the corner of 19th and Pennsylvania Avenue. So this was his shop. You can see a locomotive heading east on Pennsylvania Avenue, a coach coming down 19th Street. His shop was called the Union Malleable Iron Works. So he was making pipe fittings at a time when the infrastructure of Philadelphia was getting built up. If you just think that right now there are 10,000 miles of pipes underneath the streets of Philadelphia. That's sewers, water, gas, and steam. So there were a huge number of pipes being put down at this time, and he supplied the pipe fittings. Here's a shot from 1892. This is a hexamer map of the Stanley Flag Company. This is North 19th Street here. This is Pennsylvania Avenue. Underneath, well, into his work yard, he had a spur off of Pennsylvania Avenue that went right in here. And just take note for later of the colorings on this. Pink is brick, so this is a brick building, and blue is metal. So this is a brick building with a metal roof here shown in blue. Yellow is wood. So after they put the tracks in the 25-foot deep ditch, this spur was placed below grade, and trains would pull in here, or the cars would pull in here. They would be put on a hydraulic lift, which would then lift them up to ground level at the Stanley Flag Company. Also, you'll note here the ramps that go up to the granary. So again, a lot of the buildings had ramps, and instead of this structure, that will allow the cars to come in and load and unload. But if you look today, those artifacts are still there. Here's the tunnel underneath this building here, the Tivoli. That tunnel is partially filled in, but it's the tunnel that was there since 1898. And here's the ramp going up to the granary. The ramp is still there, and the train tracks on that ramp are still there. One set going here, one set going here. So those are some more artifacts. And I told you to note the colors on this. This is the pink is brick, blue is metal, and this site is now occupied by this building, the Tivoli, which I think is one of the nicer looking buildings in the neighborhood. But it is a brick building with a blue metal roof. And I'm going to say that this whole building is an artifact. That's the architect might have seen the 1892 hexamer map and designed the building based on the Stanley Flag Company. I'm often told that I make too many connections, but I'm going to stick with that. Another connection is the granary that I mentioned before. This was built in 1865, and it is still there today in a second incarnation. But that was at the corner of Pennsylvania Avenue and 20th Street. So this is a view looking down Pennsylvania Avenue towards the east. You see the Stanley Flag Company right here. You see the wooden granary right here. And that wooden granary burned down in 1925. Granaries are prone to explosions and fires. And it did burn down, and it was replaced by, excuse me, a poured in place continuous pour concrete building the same year, 1925. So this was acquired by the Tidewater Grain Company, and you can see that on the side. But it went through a couple different functions after Tidewater Grain abandoned it in the 1950s. It was used as a discotheque, a restaurant, a residence, office buildings, and eventually, more recently, it was turned into a liquor store, a fine wine and good spirits liquor store on the first 2 floors, and then a hotel on the top 3 floors. So the nice thing is that the name of the hotel is the Tidewater Sonder. So they tapped into history by naming this building the Tidewater Sonder. And I just want to give a shout out to Mel Seligson, who is on this Zoom, I think. But he encouraged the owner of this building to reference its history by naming it the Tidewater Sonder. He also pushed to have the mural on the side of 417 North 20th Street, referencing the neighborhood's industrial history. He also played a part, along with Sandy Owens, in getting the state marker for the Baldwin Locomotive Works put there. And there is a new building going up on 1825 Callow Hill Street, and he lobbied that owner to get that building named the Baldwin. So a lot of Baldwin references coming back. So in 1928, this is a shot that I've shown you twice before, but you see Spring Garden Street, the Inquirer Building, the Callow Hill Cut. But all this kind of became abandoned. This was all torn down. This western part of the eastern part of the Baldwin Locomotive Works was torn down in 1936. Most of these other buildings over this way became warehouses. The exception is this few buildings right here, including this Baldwin building right here. This became part of a company that moved into the neighborhood called ITE. They made circuit breakers, and they were a very big business in the neighborhood during the 1950s and 1960s. But ITE, along with 4 other companies, SmithKline French, Corman Corporation, and Pico, along with a brokerage firm, they were buying up properties in the 1950s and 1960s in this neighborhood that was kind of going downhill. Once the industry left, the jobs left, then the people left. And in 1971, it was announced that there was going to be a new private development called Franklintown on 50 acres of this neighborhood. So Franklintown was made up of those 5 companies I mentioned. They had already acquired 70% of the properties in the neighborhood before this was announced. And they had an agreement before it was announced with the city and the redevelopment authority to help them acquire the other 30% of the land they needed by eminent domain. So the plan is shown here for Franklintown. This is down near Vine Street. This is going to be office buildings. They're going to put in a new diagonal street called Franklintown Boulevard, which would terminate in a park called Franklintown Park. And around this park, you would have high-rise residences that would look down on the park. You would also have theaters, hotels, parking for 4,000 cars. And all this was to be completed within a decade. So they announced in 1971 with hopes to complete it within a decade. Here's another view in 3 dimensions of Franklintown, the proposal. So again, you see the structures down on Vine Street, the office buildings, Franklintown Boulevard, terminating in Franklintown Park. Now, when they announced this in 1971, it took a lot of the neighbors by surprise because they had no idea that this was coming. And they protested. An agreement was made that any of the neighbors who wanted to stay in the neighborhood could stay in the neighborhood in houses that would be provided for them, either new houses, and then eventually, when the city realized how much, or when Franklintown realized how much the new houses would cost, they rehabbed a bunch of houses. So the neighbors who wanted to stay did stay, but they were still resentful because in the 1970s, inflation hit, economics took a downturn, and only a few buildings got built. Now, all this land here in Franklintown did get leveled, but the city within a city that was proposed never got built within a decade. Spring Garden Towers got built, one tower of City View got built, and Hamilton Townhomes got built, but then things got stuck. So the park was initially called Franklintown Park Connections. That's the artwork in the park, designed by Athena Taka. But in 2009, when the historical marker was placed, there was a push for having the park renamed because people still resented the name Franklintown because of their desultory building patterns. And they wanted to honor the industrialists in the area, especially Matthias Baldwin. So they lobbied the city to have the name changed to Matthias Baldwin Park. And that was officially declared in 2011. So that is the last artifact of the industrial area that I can think of, Matthias Baldwin Park itself, which is a piece of art. We, next door, the online community bulletin board did change the name of the neighborhood from Franklintown to Matthias Baldwin, to Baldwin Park neighborhood. And next up is to get Google to change it on Google Maps. So I'll end it there, and I'll entertain any questions that people have either in the chat or actually I'll let Muriel run this, whatever she decides.
Oh, no. Lenny was going to monitor the questions.
Okay.
There's a couple of questions, and then people can unmute themselves and ask questions or continue putting them in the chat, but we did have a couple of questions. One early on was, why did the proposed canal not connect with the Schuylkill at Spring Garden? And so that's that canal that you showed us in the very early slide.
Why
So
did it?
Why did it not connect with the Schuylkill at Spring Garden?
I don't know. Robert Morris had bought a right of way coming down along just below what was Penn's old lands. So it may have been that he couldn't acquire that property. I'm not sure. Anyone else know? No? All right.
And then Lee Altmeyer asked, when did college-educated engineers arrive? When did that profession start to be?
I don't know the answer to that one either. None of the people I mentioned, I don't think any of the people I mentioned finished high school.
Yeah, I don't know.
I had a question, Joe, and that is the statue that got vandalized. Do you know, has that been cleaned up? Because that's like such a sad thing to have happened.
It was sad, but they cleaned it up right away. They were pretty good about it. I mean, they vandalized the Civil War memorials on the Parkway as well, which made no sense, but they were cleaned up within days.
Okay.
I had a question. I was so struck by the image where Baldwin's statue had been previously at Spring Garden, at that central park area down the middle of the street. And also I got a little confused about directions. Was the Lulu Temple, was that where that high school is now that has that wonderful mural on the side of it that they're trying to protect with development?
I believe it is.
Yeah.
Lulu Temple is where the Thaddeus Stevens School is.
Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, okay, but boy, that the appearance of Spring Garden Street was wonderful. I think they're working again on, yes, this is so amazing, you know.
That's the original Spring Garden.
Yes,
Oh, this spring back here, Joel?
Yeah, that was called Spring Garden. My
Oh,
father
nice.
and grandfather had businesses on that down around the 1000 block. And there had been a garden and fragments of a garden which somehow exists like over around 19th Street or something. There is a little garden in the middle of the street, not quite that wide, right? That's still in the middle of Spring Garden Street.
Yeah, that garden on between 19th and 20th on Spring Garden is maintained by one of the friends of Baldwin Park, Mrs. Boehner. So she does that all herself, one person taking over a little part of Philadelphia to make it nice.
No, nice. But the park went all the way down, and Spring Garden Street actually dead ended at Broad Street, and then you had to do like a little dog leg. I mean, what they did when they rerouted, like when you come up Spring Garden Street now from 13th, you kind of go off to the right and line up with Spring Garden Street on the western side of Broad Street.
Yeah,
But they didn't line up for some reason. I don't know why. Spring Garden Street on the west side of Broad Street was a little north of Spring Garden Street on the east side of Broad Street.
yes, you can see that in the old maps. And Spring Garden was the 9th most populous city in the United States before it consolidated with Philadelphia. Spring Garden City Hall was right here at 13th Street, right across from the fountain.
wow.
Was the city hall on the site of where the Assumption Church is now?
Seamus, I think it was near there. I'm not sure exactly on that site.
Okay.
One
And,
more question about Baldwin, if I could.
Sure.
I think I'd read maybe in a book called The Baldwin Locomotive Works or Building Baldwin, was that the employment there peaked right around World War I, which would be, I guess, in the city proper before the move to down to Eddystone. Is that something you can comment on?
I think by 1917, when we entered the war, most of the work was being done at Eddystone. In fact, a lot of the work was in the munitions, along with all the other big machine makers. They were into munitions. But I'm not sure the proportion that was done in the city and versus Eddystone at that time.
So both works were producing, and it was only in the 20s when they abandoned the stuff around the city innards then.
Yeah, he was moving to Eddystone starting in 1906. He was building up down there. In fact, that white building I showed you in the north side of Baldwin Park was built in 1916. So it doesn't make sense to me that they were planning to move and they were building an 8-story building in the north part of Baldwin Park. But apparently, like you said, there was so much business for the machine makers between building locomotives for the Allies, building munitions, that there was plenty of work all around.
Yeah, I think they said they had 3 shifts, and just like at the Navy Yard and other places, the third shift had 1/3 of the workforce. So 5,000 or 6,000 people on the third shift.
In the 1950s and 1960s, that ITE circuit breaker company had 3 shifts, and you could hear them chopping steel, making some stuff all night long. It was a real happening in the neighborhood.
Thanks, Seamus, for that.
Joe, we have a couple of questions from Melvin. When was the Mint building built and who designed it?
Very
And then
good.
also asking, what about the Sikorsky helicopter building? The Mint building and the Sikorsky helicopter building.
The Mint was built in 1901 as the 3rd Mint of the United States. I don't know exactly who built it. It was someone from it was a government architect who designed it. And the Sikorsky building, there was never a Sikorsky building here. There was a Piasecki who built helicopters, and his company became part of Boeing. Piasecki built his first office on Callow Hill Street, in the 1900 block of Callow Hill Street. And he started here, and he was one of the first helicopter builders in the United States. The first was Sikorsky, he was second, really. But he built some big helicopters that were used in World War II in the Korean War. There is a state historical marker for Piasecki on the 1900 block of Callow Hill Street.
Joe, I was wondering, you had mentioned the boarding houses for the workers, and you showed the row houses, and I assume families might have been, living in some of those. So the Baldwin Company never really had, they didn't provide workers houses. They weren't the kind of company that, like Roebling and so on. They didn't do that.
As far as I know, the answer is no. If someone else knows different, let me know.
Mary Ann put a comment in the chat. She said, for your information, the Philadelphia lawyer who built Bush Hill was Andrew Hamilton, not Alexander Hamilton. She just wanted to make that correction.
I wondered. Oh.
Thank you. It was Andrew Hamilton, yes.
Yes, and she also mentions that Andrew also owned 250 acres in Blockley Township, which eventually his grandson William Hamilton inherited, and he built the woodlands there.
Yes.
His mansion, which is now the site of the cemetery, and of course the mansion is also still there.
Yep. Marion, thank you for that. And just so you know, Hamilton Street, which goes into Baldwin Park, is named after the Hamilton family, Andrew and his grandson William.
There's a couple things. One is after the passage of the Constitution, there was an annual constitutional parade that went from the State House building, which is now Independence Hall, all the way up to the Hamilton Mansion on Bush Hill. And they did that for many, many years until the Capitol moved to Washington. And secondly, there is another Baldwin artifact, not associated with his industry, but with his philanthropy. There's a church on 22nd Street between Wallace and Mount Vernon Street that was in part funded by him, his philanthropy.
Yes, Seamus, thanks for that. If you go on the website and just put churches in the search box, you'll find an article about that that's not published yet. But he provided a lot of money for that church as well as 5 other churches in Philadelphia. The church that Seamus mentioned is still there, and there's one other church that's still there, but all the others are gone.
Mm.
Oh, Melvin, it looks like you're talking. You should unmute yourself.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, so Andrew Hamilton was the original Philadelphia lawyer. A Philadelphia lawyer back then was considered the finest lawyer you could find. He was the one who won the case he went to New York and he won a case for Ziegler, was it? For freedom of the press. So he was an incredibly important historic figure. That's one thing. The other thing is that the area where our park is, Matthias Baldwin Park, that area, this is just legendary, but that is where Benjamin Franklin was supposed to have flown his kite and discovered electricity. And the artifact from that is the Kite and Key Bar and Grill
Yeah,
on Callahill Street. So
I
it
remember
lives,
that,
it
yeah.
lives, the legend lives on Callahill Street. And it is windy up there. It is, there is always a breeze up there. Maybe it's Joe talking too much, but it could be.
Let me ask, was any archaeology done at the park in terms of the setting up the landscape?
I don't know the answer to that.
I don't think so.
The
Huh.
site of where the Kite and Key Tavern was the site of the ITE Employees Union Hall.
Mm.
Wow.
Joe and everybody, Jay Farrell has just said that the architect of the Mint was James Knox Taylor. And he's included a link to about the Mint at PAB.
All right, thank you, Jay.
The prison itself is an incredible artifact. I'm surprised you may not have mentioned that because it's so big, but it was the first solitary confinement prison in the world, and it was a Quaker institution. Until that was built, prisoners were all sort of thrown in the same place that, then they were kind of left to their own misery. And the Quakers decided that was, that penitentiary is the first prison reform institution in the world, and it was copied all over the world. They have a wonderful tour in there. I haven't been in a couple of years, but they're very, very good. And that has brought hundreds of thousands of tourists to the area. And it's really made that whole area very lively and interesting. And it's just marvelous. And if you go a little further, of course, is Girard College, which was designed by the guy Thomas U. Walter, who designed the Capitol building in Washington. So this neighborhood is filled with fascinating history. And in my opinion, it's as important to the history of the country as the Independence hall area is. People just are not aware of it, and we thank Joe so much for making it known to the general public. Thanks a lot, Joe. We all appreciate it. Believe me.
You're welcome, and thanks for all your help.
You're welcome.
If I may, the penitentiary deserves a little bit more story, because it's called a penitentiary, designed for prisoners to become penitents, to
Right.
ponder their sins. The Quaker method of worship is deep meditation. And so the Quaker influence on the design of the prison was to allow for single cells so that each prisoner could then ponder why they're there and come to a realization that they would become penitent and then reform themselves and then leave. That was basically the idea.
Didn't work.
No, it didn't. They weren't Quakers.
True.
There's a synagogue there, and there was a whole wing made for Russian and other Eastern European criminals.
Mhm,
Yeah.
But, they did have their own synagogue,
mhm.
and
They
it's
also
been
had their own-
restored.
They also had their own baseball team playing in a very cramped field.
Mm. The building itself, architectural historians consider that building the first modern building because of the design in the interior, having the core in the middle and then the wings coming out. That is considered form follows function, and that's a tenet of modern architecture. Form follows function, and that was the first building that was used in.
It also had individual flush plumbing. That's
Really?
the other reason why they could afford the individual cells.
Mm.
But the whole deal was they only flushed it once a week. It was a prison. And
Yeah.
who knows how wonderfully it smelled in there. It had flush plumbing before the White House. So,
It's amazing.
Wow.
but I'm not sure they were penitent the whole time. Maybe they did have things to think about, though.
Yeah. How to get out of there. Yeah.
Any other questions for Joe? Well, it was a fantastic talk. Joe, thank you so very, very much.
Thank
All right.
you again.
Thank you.
Hey,
Yeah.
thanks,
I
Joe.
certainly
Thanks,
learned a
Joe.
huge amount.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thanks for your interest, everyone.
Yes.
Thank you.
Keep up the good work, Joe.
Thank you, Seamus.
Yeah. Thanks, Joe, for being our guest speaker this month. And I guess you're on our mailing list, so you'll know about the next presentation. We have one in January, correct?
All right, thank you.
Yes.
You're-
Yeah, we'll share
We'll share
information with you for building
We'll share.
memberships. Yeah.
All right, great, thanks.
Will this talk be archived online for later access? For those who
We're going to
missed it?
work on doing that. Yes.
Okay, great.
Yeah, we've recorded it, and so we intend to put it up on the website.
Great.
Thanks, Lenny. Thanks, Muriel.
Okay.
We'll
See you guys again next time.
All right.
All
Take
right.
care. Muriel, you
Bye,
Bye, folks.
shut
Bye,
it down.
folks.
Yeah. I forget.
So long now.
I forget where to do that.
Down at leave. You can just,
Where? What?
down at leave, you can
I
shut
can
it down.
stop. I can stop the recording.